Rise Gardens is a revolutionary hydroponic gardening system for your home. Instead of food, traveling hundreds or even over 1,000 miles before it hits your plate, harvest the veggies, herbs, and greens you need for dinner tonight in the comfort of your home. No green thumb required knowledge. Gardening made easy with the Rise Gardens app. Step-by-step guidance from seed to harvest. A complete garden on a shelf and comes with everything you need to grow healthy and the freshest food for you or your loved ones. Fully customize your garden to your needs and preferences. For more information and get your Rise Gardens, visit risegardens.com.
Holly, let's go to the hotline and bring in our guest for this week.
Noelle Johnson is a desert plant garden educator, author, horticulturist, presenter, and more. She is known as the AZ or Arizona Plant Lady, and her book is called Dry Climate Gardening. Welcome to the program, Noelle.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with this. We've got listeners all over the country, and I think the unique aspect or the challenge that everybody faces is how do we grow things when there's not a lot of water? But how did you get into desert gardening? Was this an accident or a happy thing that happened, or you grew up with it?
Purely by accident. I married the love of my life and moved to Arizona.
Always a good thing.
Yes, it was. And we bought, which he was from here, and we bought our first home. And I had visions of having a little garden plot and growing vegetables and having beautiful flowering plants. And so I set to work on that. I ordered plants from a catalog because back in those days, that was what you had to do. There was no internet. And all the things said that they would survive in my Zone 9 garden. And unfortunately, about 6 months after I had gotten all my new plants, every single one of them was dead. I killed everything. And it wasn't for a lack of trying. And I realized that while I checked with the USDA zones for minimum cold temperatures, those didn't take into account how hot the desert gets, and that not a lot of that those plants that I had purchased were not suitable for the climate. And sadly, there were very few resources available to me to figure out how do I garden successfully in the desert. So I started to make the trip down to the library and learned what I could, but there was precious little. And so I decided at that point, I had 2 years of college under my belt, and I had been at a standstill for several years because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Well, now I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to learn about gardening and gardening in the desert and figure out how to do it right so that I could help others do it in the future.
Fantastic. That is really great. So what are some unexpected challenges in dry climate gardening that maybe people should know about or you just faced, and how did you overcome them?
Oh, sure. Well, there are several challenges with dry climate gardening. And the first and foremost is making sure that we are using water as wisely as possible. Our water resources here in the west and southwestern United States are shrinking. And whereas in the past you could turn on the hose or turn on your irrigation system and not really think about where the water's coming from, now we have to start to think about that. Some municipalities are putting in watering restrictions. You're limited as to what days you can water. And so we need to use it responsibly. And the good news is that we can have an amazing, beautiful garden because there are countless plants that do beautifully in a dry climate and add a lot of beauty to your outdoor space. And you would never know that they were lower water use plants. And I'd say one other thing that is challenging, and in this case, it's more for a desert type garden, is that if you read a plant label and you're looking for recommended plant exposure, if it says full sun, it doesn't necessarily mean it could handle the intense full sun of a dry climate. So a lot of people can experience disappointment when they see that, because they followed the directions on the label, yet their plant kind of got a little crispy or wilty and failed to thrive. So that's why using and utilizing local resources are really vital, such as your botanical garden, looking at local nurseries for resources. And most municipalities, larger ones, have watering guidelines that are specific for your locality.
Well, for people whom have only heard things about Arizona and the heat, and it's a dry heat, is there does the municipalities encourage or provide rebates on manipulating your landscape to a more of a desert climate environment, like ripping out the yard? And or is there a lot of enough rainfall in order to incorporate rain collection attributes to the property, rain barrels and that, in order to utilize that for the plants?
Yes. So first of all, many municipalities do offer rebates for ripping out your lawn, because that's the thirstiest plant that we have, and it requires a large amount of supplemental water. And the sprinkler system, when you use your sprinklers to water your grass in an arid climate, up to 50% of that water evaporates immediately into the air before it ever hits the ground. So there are rebates available for people who want to rip out their lawn in many towns and cities. So that's definitely something to look into. Water harvesting is a big deal, and it can be done. Where I live, we get about 8 inches a year. That's equally split between winter and summer. And so you can use rain barrels and water tanks, but you can also do passive water harvesting and contour the landscape so that you are capturing water as it runs off from your roof, and you can channel it to your plants.
8 inches, that's not much.
Definitely not. So you have a book called Dry Climate Gardening. Can you tell us more about it? Maybe something that would pique our listeners' interest to go and pick up a copy to check it out.
Oh, certainly. I wrote this book because I wanted a resource for other gardeners that I didn't have. And I poured all my knowledge into it, and much of it is what I teach to my clients because I work as a landscape consultant. And it is meant to be a guide that is easy to follow so that people do not experience the overwhelm that I did. We have a lot of people moving into this area. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the country. Most people don't know that. And it's growing and growing and growing. And so the goal of the book was to show people break gardening down easily in an arid climate. How do you do it successfully? And what most people mention about the book is it does a lot of myth busting in terms of people think that a dry climate garden is brown, filled with rocks, and really boring. But it can be exactly the opposite. It can be full of color and pollinators. And in many areas throughout the Southwest, you can garden 12 months out of the year and have things growing.
Well, and you look at photographs of the desert, it's not just dead plants. There's a lot of flowers and wildlife and activity going on, even though it's in a very warm and hot area.
Yes, and that speaks to how plants have adapted over time, and they've adapted to survive within that climate and do it very well.
Now, you're originally from Southern California, and are there things that you miss about gardening in Southern California, or is it so different that you've kind of forgot about that?
No, I did do gardening when I was younger. And, people have said this to me, and I feel the same way, is you can throw a plant on the ground, you barely have to dig a hole, and it'll probably grow just fine. Because, most of California, especially around the coastal areas, have a wonderful Mediterranean climate. And so there aren't a lot of extreme challenges, except now with our water supplies shrinking, that is definitely affecting Mediterranean climates around California and deserts in California as well. So the push there is to really use native plants or native or arid adapted plants that come from a similar region that can get by with less water. But it is easier to garden there.
Well, as the environment changes, some people label it climate change. Other people just say it's the way things are going. What are some of your heat-proof gardening tips that not only can be used in Arizona, but anywhere in the country when we get these really hot summers?
Yes. The number one heat-proof gardening tip, no matter where you live, is planting more trees. And some people will say, well, I have a couple of big trees. I don't have enough room for another big tree. Well, there are smaller trees out there. You can plant smaller trees. You can plant tall shrubs that will provide shade at certain times of the day. And more than anything else, that is going to drop the temperature around the plants that get to enjoy that shade. And it makes a big difference. We have had record-breaking temperatures in the Southwest this summer. And I know much of the South has, and I know the Midwest just had a big heat wave as well. I was in Minneapolis a month ago, and then it was pretty toasty up there. But when it comes to saving water, shade is really going to be the biggest thing that we can do moving forward. And luckily, trees are beautiful. They are very good for the environment. And this is a strategy to begin now, because trees take a while to get growing. We may not have a record-breaking summer next year, but I guarantee you there is a definite upward trend of temperatures, and we need to be proactive.
Well, and the trees, well, I don't have room. The other trees are eventually going to die, so go ahead and plant the trees where you want, and it's easy to trim. It's hard to get that tree to grow in 20 years in 2 months.
Yes. Yeah, it is. So another thing that we do, particularly if there is a short-term heat wave, you can use shade cloth. Shade cloth is your best friend. You can buy it at the nursery, but you can also order it online very easily. And you can use shade cloth to provide temporary shade, which is helpful for plants, particularly during a period where you are having a heat wave. So that could be a really helpful tool to have.
Is there a certain percentile of shade that you recommend, because they come in all grades?
They do. So 50% is a good general one to use for most types of plants, and you can use it for vegetable gardens. If you are looking at providing some protection for succulents or cacti, things that normally thrive in full sun and heat and hot conditions, a 30% shade cloth would be sufficient.
So this has been some really great information, and we have enjoyed having you on the program. How can people find out more about you?
And get that book.
And get your book.
Well, the book is available everywhere where you sell books. You can buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can look online with independent booksellers. You can get it there as well. To find out more about me, you can visit my website at azplantlady.com. I'm also on Instagram at az.plant.lady and Facebook at azplantlady.
Well, Noelle, we greatly appreciate the time and the information that is very relevant and relatable to many aspects and parts of the country. Because of your experience, you've helped a lot of plants survive the heat. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.